Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. If you'd like to help support this show and even get some extra episodes, then feel free to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin. You can get bonus stories on Kowabana's off weeks and even early access to the videos on our YouTube channel. That's patreon.com/TaraADevlin. Every bit of support really helps. Thanks, guys. This week, we're looking at some scary stories set in and around temples and shrines. Those sacred spaces that are supposed to be safe, but often aren't. First up, a small village has a custom where one family each year takes charge of the area, including the cleaning of a shrine. But this shrine has a rather interesting history. Find out why in Tozewa. I heard a rather occultish story from my grandmother when I returned to our family home today, so I'll do my best to retell it here. It's a little lengthy, but if you've got time, please read it. There's a system where my family home is called Tozewa. How it works is that the family that gets chosen is basically in charge of the area for the next year. This year, our family was chosen. And because this system involves cleaning the local shrine during summer to get it ready for festivals and such, my grandmother and I went up the mountain to clean it. I carried her cleaning equipment on my back. I haven't visited that shrine in 10 years or so. As a kid, I always skipped out on community events. So as I walked around, feeling nostalgic, I found a large tree with an oddly constricted trunk. "Grandma, what's up with this tree?" I asked. I remembered this same tree from many years ago. "Ah, that's right. I never did tell you about it, did I? Shall I tell you while we clean?" she said. "Is it an interesting story?" I asked as she took her cleaning tools out of the basket. And then she grinned. "Maybe. So, you know the name of the lord who used to rule this area long, long ago, yes?" Of course I knew. Everyone knew. He was famous. One time, a man who was a retainer of that lord came to our village. Of course, the villagers welcomed him and made him feel at home, and they let him stay at the shrine, which was the highest position in the village. But before long, they realized something. This retainer was an imposter. He was a soldier from a province that lost in battle against the Lord. "You mean he was a deserter?" I asked. The villagers feared what would happen if the Lord discovered they had entertained one of his enemies, so they decided to kill him. They got him drunk and then killed him in front of that tree, my grandmother said, pointing to the weird tree. They thought they might be praised for defeating one of his remaining enemies, so they decided to leave behind just his head and cut it off with a sharp sickle. But they couldn't cut it, no matter how hard they tried. So instead, they brought over a nutter, and finally they were able to cut it off. The head then went flying into the air, before landing in the part where the tree trunk splits in two. The men tried climbing the tree to retrieve it, but the blood made it too slippery and they kept falling back down. They then tried to poke it with a long stick, but still it wouldn't come down. If it was stuck there, then there was little the villagers could do about it, they thought. So they got rid of the body and left the head where it was. "Eh? Isn't that kinda gross?" I said. My grandmother looked at the look on my face and laughed. People rarely visited the shrine, so they wouldn't have to look at it much. Anyway, not too long after that, a man who had always been healthy and strong suddenly passed out and died. Of course, he was the man who cut off the enemy soldier's head. At the time, they didn't notice that year's crops were bad and that a strange illness was passing through the village. When they did, they started to think it was a curse from that man's head. They tried a cleansing ceremony, but it did nothing. At a loss for what to do, they then tied sacred rope around the tree, covered it in protective charms, and tried to seal the man inside that tree. Even though the cleansing ceremony didn't work, I asked. Nobody knew why, but after that, the disasters stopped. People sure are frightening creatures. To go from cleansing didn't work, so we'll seal him inside the tree instead. And so, each year they took turns covering the tree in new protective charms and replacing the old sacred rope. And that brings us to now. But over time, the custom started to weaken, and people left the charms and rope as it was. As the tree grows, that area with the sacred rope is the only part that stays constricted. So, the curse is gone now then? I asked. No, my grandmother replied. Strange things still happen once in a while. The son of that family, he lost his mind, yes? He wasn't always like that. Why is it just that family? And hey, what about our family? It's not just that family. It happened to that other family too. Now that she mentioned it, the mother and daughter from that family did go crazy, and then they moved away several years ago. And then there's the Nani families. She mentioned another 3 households. I don't remember which, but they were all strange families. What about other families? What about us? I asked. The other families aren't originally from here. And I never told you, huh? Our family were originally merchants with a lengthy history, but they were unable to continue, and so your grandfather and I were adopted into our current family, and we took over once we got married. Now, our family is a regular one. Our line stopped being merchants with my great-grandfather, but the trade name remains, and people still call us by that name. I thought this sort of thing was normal with every family, but I guess not. Once the bloodline dies out, it seems nothing more happens. So, where are you and Grandpa from? She smiled. Somewhere far, far away. So that was why we didn't have many relatives. I heard all this from my mother-in-law, my grandmother said. I don't know if it's true or not. You say that now, I laughed. Well, either way, we're fine. You don't need to worry. But don't get too close to that tree either way. Looking closely, there was a lump near the part of the tree where the trunk split that was about the size of a human head. It couldn't be, I thought. And whether the story was true or not was also a mystery. It feels bad to say, but there are several families in our area that are kind of strange. A mayoiga is a house that's said to appear and disappear almost on a whim. In this next story, we have a mayoi dera, which is a temple that does the same thing. How and why does this temple appear? And if it does, how can you escape it? Find out in Illusionary Temple. This is an old legend told in my hometown. I think it's probably a mayoiga type story, but it's not all that scary. I was in the Kendo Club when I was a junior high student, and during the summer holidays, we stayed at a temple in town for our training camp. While we were there, the chief priest, who was in his 50s, gathered all the club members in front of the main hall before bed and told us this story. Long ago, the village peasants didn't really go into the mountains much. When they needed things like charcoal, woodworks, or animal meat, they traded vegetables and such with those who lived in the mountains to get it. But, in general, they had enough kindling for firewood, and they were able to make wooden farming tools with what they had in the village. Plus, they could simply buy lacquer bowls and such from peddlers, so this trading wasn't often necessary. Even so, every now and then they'd still go out to pick some mountain vegetables and mushrooms. When they did, they'd go in a group, and they made sure to never go far from the trail. If you did, then you might get lost and find yourself at a mountain temple. This temple wasn't always there, but it was said that the large gates to it would suddenly appear to those who were lost. Once you passed through that gate, you would find yourself in the grounds of a temple with its doors open. Inside, the candles would be lit and incense burning, but there would be no sign of anyone around. No matter how much you called out, nobody would appear. To get back to where you came from, you would have to enter a hole behind the statue of Buddha in the main hall. This led underground and was wide enough for just one person to fit, like the ordination platform tour at Zenkoji Temple. This underground area was a pitch-black cave, but even so, you still had to walk through it with your eyes closed. If you kept walking with one hand on the wall, suddenly the sensation of the wall would disappear, and when you opened your eyes, you would find yourself suddenly standing on a familiar mountain path. And apparently, that was the only possible way you could get back. If you didn't go through the temple gate, then you would be forever lost in the mountains and die of exhaustion. If you didn't close your eyes in the underground cave, then you would just keep walking forever and never find an exit. Looking back on it now, it kind of sounds like a role-playing game. But when we heard that story, there wasn't a single person there who knew about those types of games. And the most important thing of all was that you mustn't bring back anything from the temple. If you succumbed to greed and brought back even the smallest thing, you would be able to return home, yes, but in return, you would lose your name. That part didn't really make sense to me, and the chief priest never explained it either. I thought that maybe it meant you would lose your family house or something like that, or maybe that nobody in the village, including your family, would remember you. It was a strange story that stuck with me for a long time, and when we had a reunion recently, us members of the Kendo Club got to talking about it again. It was so strange how people knew how to leave the temple and return to the village. But when I checked the local and town history when I was in university, I couldn't find anything written about it. The most likely explanation is that the chief priest made up the story to entertain us junior high kids. But he has since long passed away, so I can't ask him about it now. The kids in this next story find out the room they're staying in a temple is actually where the scary story they just heard took place. But was it true? Find out in Scary Story Room. This happened a long time ago, but it's a true story as far as I can remember. When I was in elementary school, I stayed at a temple in the mountains during the summer holidays for a Cub Scout camp. At this temple, there were lots of rare, laughing Jizo statues. Their faces alone were pretty scary, but then the chief priest also told scary stories in the main hall at night. I was a scaredy cat, so I covered my ears. When he was finally done, it was time to go to bed. My group was in a room for 4, and there were 2 bunk beds in it. As we were about to go to sleep, another group passed by our room whispering about something. "That's the room, right?" Curious, I asked them what they meant, and they said that the storehouse, I think, the chief priest had just told us a scary story about, was the one beneath our window, and apparently, strange things happened in our room at night. I was too scared to ask for details and returned to the room, and my 3 roommates were also scared and covered their ears during the chief priest's story too. The leader then came to our scaredy cat room and told us to turn off the lights and go to bed. All 4 of us were terrified, having learnt of something scary but not the full details. But we didn't want to look pathetic enough to all sleep in the same bed, so we each climbed into our own and tried to sleep. I often tossed and turned in my sleep, so I took the bottom bunk, but I was so scared that it was difficult to fall asleep. We ran around a lot during the day though, so even though I was scared, exhaustion eventually won out, and I fell asleep. During the night, a large impact woke me up. I realized that, I've fallen out of bed, and I groped around for it, but there was nothing. It was gone. I had bad eyes and it was dark, so it took me a while to grasp what was going on. I was in the middle of both sets of bunk beds. In other words, on the wooden floor, right in the middle of the room. Why was I there? That impact was definitely me falling out of bed. In a daze, I got up to return to my bed, fear swelling inside me. Then I froze in fear when a voice called out, "Hey! Hey! Kay! Are you awake?" It was S from the neighbouring bed. Nervous, I whispered to him on the top bunk. "What's wrong?" "Come here, please." His voice was oddly stifled, but I was glad that someone else was awake, so I went over and climbed up. "Someone's been knocking on the glass above my head," he said as I was climbing the ladder, referring to the small window. My legs suddenly stopped where they were. My face was halfway over his bed when I saw S shivering under his blanket. I could hear it too. Bang! Bang! I couldn't turn to look at the window either. I felt like I would freeze if I did. If I did look at it, what would I have seen? At any rate, I jumped from the ladder and hit the ground with an awkward thud. Then, I guess, I passed out. When I came back to in the morning, the leader and someone from the temple was looking after me. Apparently, nobody heard the sound of me falling, but when they were doing their rounds in the morning, they found me lying on the floor, right there in the middle of the room. Fortunately, I wasn't badly injured, and I was soon able to walk normally again, but the leader angrily lashed out at the chief priest. "Children are easily influenced by such stories," etc., etc. Seemed he was upset that the scary stories from the night before had gone too far. Even as a kid, I thought that he was just shifting the blame, but the chief priest apologized earnestly. When I later asked S about what happened that night, his face went pale, and he said he didn't remember. I kept asking him about it, but he was terribly frightened and just kept saying he didn't know. I thought that maybe he felt bad because I fell and he didn't help me. Instead, I heard a rather surprising story from the other 2 boys who stayed in our room. "I woke up during the night and I saw yellow smoke or something on the other side of the window," one said, while the other said, "I heard a really loud banging on the window during the night." Meaning every single one of us experienced something strange. Every time I spoke to the grown-ups about it, they got angry, so I couldn't ask them much. But I did learn one thing about that scary story the chief priest told. It was about a woman whose cries could be heard from the storehouse beneath that window at night. It didn't seem especially related to what happened to us, but at any rate, it remains as one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. During a friendly game at a shrine, some kids encounter a strange man in a kitsune mask. Who is this stranger, and what strange powers does he possess? Find out in Man in the Kitsune Mask. This happened when I was in the 3rd or 4th grade. I was playing Daruma-san ga Koronda with 5 or so friends on some shrine grounds. We were messing around on our way home from school, so we left our bags on the ground nearby. This shrine was located in town, but usually there wasn't even a priest there, and the front door was always shut. The shrine grounds were about the size of 4 classrooms. It was autumn, and I remember the grounds being covered in ginkgo leaves. I'm pretty sure there were 4 boys, and I was the only girl. When I was little, I was very strong-willed and tended to just play with the boys. They were often mean to me, but it was still more fun to play with them than the girls. So I was it, and I leaned against a tree and quickly said, "Daruma-san ga koronda," and then turned around. Everyone was frozen on the spot. That was how the game was played, but something still felt very wrong. They weren't moving at all, like they weren't even breathing. At that point, I realized that I was frozen in that position too. I couldn't move at all, but I could see what was spread out before me. To my surprise, leaves were floating in the air, like they had been stuck there. At that point, I could hear something like a bell ringing in my ears. It seemed to be coming from inside the shrine. I couldn't move my head, so it was hard to tell, but the shrine door seemed to open, and then something started walking towards us. After 5 or 6 steps, the person who made the bell sound appeared before me. It was a thin man wearing a white kimono and a kitsune mask, like the ones they sell at night stalls. I couldn't tell how old he was, but he didn't appear to be very old. "Oh my, it appears you have stopped time, young lady," the man said as he looked at me. "How surprising. It's been around 200 years since this last happened." He then looked around at each of us, one by one. So it was you who stopped time then? If so, normally I would take you with me, but it seems there's a strong force at work protecting you," he said. He then looked at each of the boys again, one by one. "This one seems to have the most siblings. I'll take him," he said, patting one of the boys on the head. Then he turned back to me. "You'll no doubt remember what happened here, but you mustn't say anything to anyone. If you do, I'll take this mask off and visit your house." Then the scenery before me distorted, as though melting, and the Daruma-san ga Koronda scene started moving once again. One of the boys twitched, as though nothing had happened. Things were back to normal. When I asked the boys about it later, nobody other than me remembered time stopping, nor did they remember a person wearing a mask. I decided that I must have been having a short dream, but something happened after that made me think that couldn't be true. The boy that the masked man touched, several days later, he died. According to our teacher, it was a mysterious high fever. Now, I don't think it was a dream. I don't know why time stopped, or why he didn't take me. The only thing I can think of is that my grandmother once said she worked as a shaman when she was young back in Okinawa. Sorry if it's not a scary story, but it actually happened to me. The couple in this next story come across a shrine in the mountains that seems to be protecting them throughout life. But why? Who is it dedicated to? Find out in Old Shrine. When I was a newlywed, I went out for a drive in the mountains with my wife. We took our usual course, and when we were about to reach the mountain tunnel, we spotted a vending machine on the side of the road, so we stopped for a short break. There was a single parking spot, so we grabbed some coffee there. It was blocked by trees from the roadside, but I then noticed a vacant lot behind the vending machine, with an old-looking shrine. It was a little strange, but I paid my respects, and we moved on. I went that way several times after that, but I forgot all about the shrine. A few years later, my wife apparently had a dream about the kami-sama of that shrine. He was very kind, and said he was watching over us. The next morning, we decided to go back and pay our respects. I hadn't been that way for a while, but I remembered it well from all the previous times I'd been there. However, that place I remembered on the mountain slope with all the old trees, with the vending machine and the vacant lot and the place to park our car, wasn't anywhere to be found. We drove around the area over and over, but we couldn't find anything. There was nothing else we could do, so we simply said a private thank you inside and drove home, confused. While out hiking, a young man discovers a strange shrine that seems to mirror itself, with two opposing sides. He finds numerous wishes posted on votive tablets, but what's the real purpose behind this dual shrine? Find out in Opposing Shrines. I discovered a strange shrine while I was hiking. There were shrine gates on both sides of a path in a valley, with steep stone steps leading up on either side. The shrines at the top were facing each other. Well, it wasn't like I was in a hurry, so first I started climbing the stone stairs to the right. The climb was so hard, however, that I started to regret how carefree I was. When I finally reached the top, there was a small hall with numerous wooden votive tablets hanging from it, which was extremely rare for such a place. They were more like those thin pieces of wood they used to ride on in the old days. But either way, numerous people had written their deep regrets and wishes for misfortune on them. And attached to these pieces of wood were the riding tools and, I guess, the watches and other small items of those who wrote them. Fresh, blank pieces of wood were in a black wooden box nearby. Feeling uncomfortable, I went back down the stairs to the other side. I debated what to do, but I thought I'd regret it if I left without checking the other side too, so I started climbing. Again, there was a small hall with pieces of wood hanging from it. It looked exactly the same as the shrine on the other side. I grabbed one of the pieces of wood and read it. This time, somebody was wishing for happiness and success. Some of the words were aimed at the rider themselves. And again, personal items were attached. For some reason, seeing these words praying for happiness did not warm my heart. As I descended the stairs once more, feeling uneasy, An old man was coming up them holding a bamboo broom. He stared at me. "You don't look like you're here to offer anything," he said, and then sat down on the stone stairs. I had no choice but to join him. According to the old man, if you wanted to fill in one of the votive tablets, then you had to do it at both shrines. You couldn't just wish for someone's misfortune. You had to wish for someone's good fortune as well. If you didn't follow the rules, then something terrible would happen to you. "You'll die?" I asked. "You'll live a long life, but it'll be in pain." "Even if you just wish for good fortune?" "That's right." The wooden votive tablets on the side expressing regrets and misfortune were far more numerous than those on the good fortune side, though. He then told me one more thing. You mustn't pray for your own misfortune or good luck. You can find this mountain in the Greater Tokyo area. Be careful who you cross on your way home from a shrine at night. The man in this next story very much comes to regret it. Find out why in 22. My grandfather, who passed away, heard this story from a friend of his. One summer, during the Taisho era, my grandfather's friend visited a shrine with his newly born son. That night, he realized he'd left something of theirs behind at the shrine, so he went back by himself to get it. After he picked it up, he was heading back to the inn where his wife and son were staying, when he saw a figure standing on some old stairs nearby. It was a cloudy night, but right as he passed the figure, the moon peeked out from behind the clouds, and the area brightened a little. The figure was a girl wearing a red hat. She was wearing a kimono, but also military boots. Nothing she was wearing matched. Surprised, the man tried to run away, but the girl followed him with great speed and then threw her hat at him. It hit him in the eye, and he stopped in pain. Then, the girl started laughing and yelling something. 22! 22! 22! 22! It was so creepy that he almost passed out, but then the next moment, the girl disappeared. He looked around, but nobody was there. He couldn't even find the hat. There was just the moon high above. He managed to get back to the inn, and thinking that he was just tired and must have been seeing things, he went to bed. But with his eyes closed, he could still hear that girl saying 22, and he struggled to sleep. The family safely returned home, and life went on as normal. Their son grew up, and although they weren't able to have a second child, they were satisfied. The man's job also went well, so he was happy with life. But even so, he couldn't help but wonder over the years if that girl he saw that creepy night meant something by the 22 she kept saying. Then, the summer the war ended, his beloved only son died in battle. On the note of death, it said, "Age of death, 22. The moment he saw that, he remembered that creepy girl's voice and shuddered in fear. A young boy finds an interesting shrine at a park, but what does it really house? He perhaps shouldn't hang around to find out. Find out why in Park Shrine. There was a park near my relative's house, and there you could find a sandpit, some statues, and some kind of small shrine. When I was a kid, I often visited their house with my parents, and so I often played at the park to kill time. One day, there were 2 other kids playing there when I arrived. I almost never saw other people there. One of them was a little older than me, and the other seemed to be younger. The younger boy was crushing bugs beneath the statue or something. I was honestly taken aback. We talked for a bit, and in the end, I decided to play with them. They then told me that the shrine will grant your wish if you pass through it 3 times. You had to enter a storage room or something. I'll call it the storage area from here on out. From either end at the back of the shrine, and then from there, climb to the attic. Then you had to go through the attic and jump to the storage area on the other side. You had to do all this 3 times. Looking at the shrine from the front, apparently you went from right to left. You couldn't do it the other way. I don't remember why. At the time, I was scared that I would get in trouble, but I was tempted by the other 2 saying they'd already had several wishes granted, so I decided to try it at least once. There was nothing in the storage area at the time, and the ceiling had a board you could move to access the attic. The pair moved that and then climbed up. I followed them, but honestly, looking back on it now, it was pretty impressive that I was able to climb up there. It was rather high up. The pair were already waiting above the other side of the storage area. "This is where you jump from," they said, moving another board and then jumping to the ground without hesitation. I was scared of the darkness in the attic and how small the area to jump from was. Plus, it was quite a distance to the ground. But finally, I jumped down. This was the first time. Once I hit the ground, they grabbed my arm. We went back to the spot we climbed the first time, and again, the pair climbed into the attic. I slowly followed them, and they both jumped ahead of me. Nervously, I followed. This was the second time. This next time was the third time, and the pair didn't wait for me, but rather went straight to the attic. I rushed over too, but before I climbed up, they had already jumped to the ground without making a sound. They could have at least waited for me, I thought, but I went over to the other side and went to jump down. But then, for some reason, I couldn't jump. I was too scared. At first, I was scared of jumping through the small gap and hitting my head or something. Plus, the floor was so far down that I was scared I might hurt myself. But still, this time it felt different to the first and second times. Something was telling me I shouldn't do it. And so I turned around and went back down the hole on the other side that I originally climbed in through. Even though it was the same size and the same height as the other side. When I got back down to the ground, the other 2 were gone. The shoes they had taken off when we entered the shrine were gone, and there was no sign of them either inside or out. In the short time it took me to climb into the attic, did they really put their shoes back on and leave without a single sound? Or were they hiding somewhere? There were 3 sets of footprints leading up to the shrine, but there was only 1 set leaving it. Mine. Wow, how did they do that? I thought. I waited for them in the sandpit for a while, but then I left when I got bored. I just recently remembered all this because that relative had a child, now elementary school age, who told me something similar happened to them. This kid was apparently dragged into the shrine, but they were creeped out and annoyed, so they didn't do it. But apparently, they were told the same story as me, which reminded me of what happened when I was a kid. Looking back on it now, I wonder if that was a spot where kids are spirited away. Or maybe I played with a Zashiki Warashi, or a Kitsune, or something. Or maybe it was just a hallucination. An epidemic long ago started a strange custom in this village. But what really happened in the forbidden area of the temple? Find out in Plague Horse. This is a story about a temple that my family on my mother's side visited. This temple wasn't very big, nor was it famous, but about 2/3 of the villagers where my mother grew up were parishioners of it. The other third were people from a discriminated area, so apparently they went to a different temple. But after the Pacific War, the area began to depopulate, and most of the villagers moved away, so apparently that other temple ceased to be. The temple became a forbidden area that nobody was allowed to enter. When I was a child, I heard stories about this when I went back to my mother's family home with her. This temple was a few hundred meters behind the main temple at the bottom of a small cliff. If you looked down from above, there wasn't much there but some thick bamboo grass and a shrine dug out of a big stone. At the top of the cliff was a fence to prevent people from going down, and inside the fence there were 4 huge gravestones. These apparently belonged to 4 generations of chief priests who worked at the temple, and they were protecting the people of the village from what lurked down there. During the Edo period, an epidemic from outside the village spread, and numerous people died. Because so many people died, they feared the corpses would spread even more infection, so the families of those who died carted them up to the cliff and then pushed the bodies over. They then threw down wood chips and torches, but because of the moisture, the bodies didn't really burn. And because it was summer, the smell of the half-burnt, half-rotten corpses was terrible. After that, the plague subsided somewhat, so the remaining villagers held a memorial service. They burnt the bodies with expensive oil, and then they rolled in a large round stone they carved a small shrine out of. Apparently, that area was those remains. After that, I heard of the Plague Horse story from my grandmother, who was still alive and well at the time. Up until she was a child, the village held an event on August 25th of the old calendar. Nobody was allowed to watch this event, except for those on duty, however. The practice was still handed down today, but because it wasn't written in the village's history, the only people who actually remembered it were some of the elderly. From evening till night, several village men would carry a thick peeled log through the main street of the village towards the mountain path. Unlike usual festivals, these men remained silent the whole time. On top of this log, they placed paper dolls meant to represent unclothed boys. Their bare bodies were covered in red spots that were supposed to signify the epidemic that once swept through the village. And all the houses in the village had to keep their doors shut tight as they passed by. Then, once they reached the outskirts of the village, everyone would chant, "Ekijin-sama, please leave now. Please ride a real horse and go away." And then the dolls would be thrown towards the mountain path. After that, the men who carried the thick log would cleanse themselves in the river, and the log was offered to the local deity at the shrine. This was performed with dolls, but when the epidemic was spreading throughout the village, apparently it was done with actual sick children sitting on the log. This was supposedly spearheaded by the Shinto priests at the shrine, and I think it's terribly interesting to see the difference in how temples and shrines carry out their duties. Finally this week, some young men help move a shrine's treasures when it's time to be renovated. But then, they all end up dying. Why? What was really inside that box? Find out in The Shrine's Treasure. This happened in a fishing village. I heard it from my father. During the war, it was decided to renovate the shrine in this fishing village for the 2600th anniversary celebrations of the Japanese Empire. To do this, they'd have to move the things in the shrine's treasure house to another location. It wasn't very convenient to have lots of people involved in this. They might steal something. So they chose 3 men close to 20 years old from the village. There were lots of children there at the time. My father heard this story from one of those men. These men had to move the shrine's treasures, but there weren't that many. One of them was an old wooden box, like the ones they used to pack things on ships. And the priest felt this one was the most important. The box was incredibly heavy, so it was difficult for the 3 men to lift, let alone move. As such, they put down logs on the ground and rolled it out. This was apparently hard work with just the 3 of them. The man who told my father this story said the box was constantly roaring. The sound was coming from inside it. And despite being early summer, the box was extremely cold to the touch. Wood is usually warm. Perhaps it was insulated. But they found it strange that this was cold. Once they were done, the men were forbidden to talk about what they had moved. And after that, 2 of the men were sent off to war. They died in battle, and their remains were never recovered. The remaining man died of illness. When he died, his entire body was covered in spots, and he was terribly thin. At first, a doctor from a nearby town thought it might be smallpox, but after that, there was no more talk of it, and no action was taken. That treasure is probably still in that village shrine, although neither I nor my family or friends have ever seen anything like that. A massive thank you and shout out to this week's Cummy Tier members, Christina, Just Sawn, and Emerald. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Kowabana Volume 13, out on Amazon right now. And check out our merchandise store at kowabana.store. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Tara A. Devlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.